As Diana mentioned in the introduction, today, the fourth Sunday in Lent, is known as Laetare Sunday. Laetare is from the Latin for the word rejoice. The name is derived from the opening words of the Latin of Isaiah 66:10, which is the traditional old-school Roman introit verse that's chanted usually at the top of a service. Rejoice with Jerusalem, and be glad for her, all you who love her, rejoice with her in joy. In the Anglican tradition, this day is known as Mothering Sunday. We use rose pink vestments, a color associated with Mary, the mother of Jesus. The day usually falls in close proximity to March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, not so much this year since Easter is just about as early as it can be. But the other reason the day is called Mothering Sunday is because the Isaiah verse uses the metaphor of Jerusalem as a mother, calling on ancient Israel to nurse and be satisfied from Mother God's consoling breast. As a mother comforts her child, I will comfort you, declares God to the Israelites. It is therefore appropriate that the creator of our women's lectionary, the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney, has slated today the story of Elijah meeting the widow at Zarephath. Dr. Gaffney writes how today's lesson speaks to the tender maternal love of God and of Jesus, both of whom feed us in the wilderness. Now, it's important to know the situational context of the prophet Elijah. When he arrived in Sidon, God had just revealed to Elijah before this that a drought was coming. So Elijah was commanded to take refuge away from his hometown in the land of Zarephath, which was in the land of Sidon. And it is here, in the land of the other, that God's maternal care is poignantly revealed. In a world plagued by scarcity and uncertainty, the widow of Zarephath embodies the struggles of so many marginalized and vulnerable individuals. With only a handful of flour and a little oil, she faces the daunting prospect of feeding herself and her son. Yet it is precisely in her own hour of need that Elijah asks for her help. Now, widows are among those who should be taken care of by others. It's a commandment in ancient Israel, just as orphans and those in need are to be cared for. They're to be fed, they're to be clothed. And here the widow is described as the one who will provide. Gaffney and other feminist and womanist interpreters have pointed out that the demand the prophet of God that the widow give him all that she has to feed her child could border on exploitative. And that's often the case in our time today. The widow easily complies with Elijah's initial request for water, but then he asks her for a bit of bread, and she explains her desperate state. There's only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug left at my home. Now look, I'm gathering 2 sticks, and I will go home and prepare oil and flour for myself and for my child, and then we will die. Still, Elijah presses her. Fear not, and go and do as you have said, only first make me a little cake, and then make something for yourself and your child. Then Elijah's final directive here is followed immediately by words attributed to God. For thus says the Holy One of Israel, the jar of flour will not empty, and the jug of oil will not decrease until the day that the Holy One grants rain upon the earth. Okay, so now there's more nuance to the request. According to Elijah, God promised that the flour and oil would not run out until the drought ends. And so presumably based on this promise, the widow complies with the request. As the story ends, it comes to pass, just as God had promised. The widow, as well as Elijah and the widow's household, ate for many days. This particular cake of bread was not, in fact, the last thing that the widow and her son ate. The story ends with life instead of death. Still, we might ask ourselves this morning if there is yet more nuanced good news for us here in this story. If we're reading through the lens as the women's lectionary intends, then we're invited to center our interpretation of what messages the story conveys about the widow and women generally. Leaving it as it stands invites us to see the widow as a passive participant in complying with the prophet Elijah's request. And from a traditional point of view, she's depicted as trusting what this unknown foreign male prophet promises that God revealed to him. Black Baptist minister and preaching professor Lisa Thompson invites us to fill in the gaps of what's missing in the details about the widow's life. Thompson argues that it is plausible that the widow might have been aware of the upcoming exchange with Elijah that would result in a miracle as she would offer her cake of bread. Look at the text at the very beginning of the story. The word of the Holy One to Elijah was, "Get up, go to Zarephath. I have commanded a woman there to provide for you." Did you catch that? God told Elijah that God had already commanded a widow to provide for him. So now we should perhaps view the widow not as simply a docile participant, but a mutually knowing agent. We can imagine that she had her own encounter with God prior to Elijah showing up. If we assume the widow had her own prior, personal, and equally trustworthy revelation from God before Elijah came, this shifts our approach to the story. Thompson argues, Elijah and the widow's encounter at the town gate might then be one of discerning the continuation of a word they both receive independent of this moment. And in this moment of their meeting, the manifestation of the miracle is dependent on their showing up to participate in pulling forth that which provided sustenance for them and for others. Let me say it to you in plain English. Thompson suggests that when Elijah meets the widow at the town gate, their encounter becomes an opportunity for both of them to discern a deeper spiritual truth beyond the immediate circumstances. It's their mutual participation in this moment that's essential for the manifestation of the miracle as they draw upon their faith and trust in God's provision. This is the most important part. The miracle here relies not just on the mundane substance of oil and bread, but also Elijah and the widow's mutual presence, trusting what each other knew of God, and an ongoing discernment in their encounter, in their present moment. So what we have here are three ingredients that make a miracle: being present in community, trusting what one another knows of God, and ongoing discernment in the present. There's still one more thing I want to mention this morning. As we reflect on the story of Elijah and the widow at Zarephath, Dr. Gaffney has also programmed the passage from Mark chapter 8, the parallel with another miraculous feeding story, that of the 4,000. Jesus is trying to teach the disciples here about these ingredients of miracle making. But because it's Mark's version of the gospel, they're not going to get it. They don't get it. But the ingredients are there all the same. Being present in community, trusting in what each other knows of God, and in the case of the gospel, trusting that Jesus is God incarnate, that Jesus has a special relationship with God and is therefore trustworthy. And third, engaging in ongoing discernment in the present. These elements enable the miraculous to unfold, transforming scarcity into abundance, transforming despair into hope. So we continue our Lenten journey On this Mothering Sunday, and as we contemplate the widow's act of hospitality, the disciples' failed test of faith, we are reminded that miracles are not merely acts of divine intervention, but collaborative endeavors between God and us. Be assured that God's maternal love sustains you in the wilderness, guiding you through times of scarcity and uncertainty. Like Elijah and the widow, we remain open to the possibilities that emerge when we come together in community. Trust in the ways that God is working in one another's lives, and discern in the present moment how to fully manifest together the life-giving work of love and redemption. Amen.